We'll kick those tires and start that perpetually virtually fake fire due to rising gas prices, inflation, and all the other things going on in the world. I am now broadcasting from the safety of my San Diego bunker. And with me today is a guest who definitely needs an introduction. I find his voice to be particularly soothing, hearkening back to the sirens of old that would lure sailors to their demise. And he, it's interesting. He has his Estonian surname beguiles actually a keen wit, a prolific author, recipient of multiple awards. He is a host, much to the chagrin of probably a majority of the nation. And he is also a screenwriter, which is also something that I think a lot of people don't actually understand about this gentleman. So he's witty, he's fun, and I think he's about to embark on perhaps the greatest adventure and accolade he will ever garner, which is, of course, a presence on this show. You will notice that he has a bookcase for a background, whereas I have a clearly obfuscated ceiling fan and some sort of red object hanging in the corner. For you listeners in the audio only, these are the things you miss when you don't watch. So without further ado, please welcome to the program, Andrew Klavan.
I'm waiting for the applause now.
Oh, can we get a laugh track? That's it. Oh man. So
I would like to point out, by the way, that luring sailors to their death is my hobby. That is something I do in my off hours. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Well, I was about to say, because I think you're based, you go between Tennessee and I think DC as well, right? So are there a lot of sailors coming down the Potomac these days or the Mississippi? I thought sirens are more of a saltwater thing, right?
Yeah, no, I'm on the Potomac, and there are all kinds of crew people going by and occasional cruise ships and everything. I lure them all. My song is irresistible.
Well, Andrew Klavan, maritime disaster instigator. So it's a future book there. Well, Andrew, I so appreciate you being here. This is actually a really cool opportunity. I was introduced to some of your videos, some of which I can't unsee, years and years ago, back in the original days of YouTube. But it's funny. I will admit, I really came to like your writing recently, just because I started reading. I had no idea you were such a prolific screenwriter and an author, which I always knew you as like the guy from the On the Culture YouTube videos. And I thought, oh, same guy. Interesting. But a very dear friend of mine and a mentor of mine passed away on last Sunday, and he was your biggest fan and would send stuff all the time. And he'd be so proud watching right now. I mean, he was a really just one of those classic Renaissance men who just like read everything, questioned everything, couldn't subscribe to just one religious faith because he found, it's funny, there's a contradictory nature there, but he found such beauty in the unknowableness of it. Like there's a reverence of like, I'm a human, I can't truly probably understand everything that's going on. But a wonderfully Socratic teacher, and he was just he's like, this is one of the voices, and he loved to listen to people on both sides of the aisle. And he's like, this is a man I deeply respect, and you need to watch his videos or I'm not going to buy you dinner. And so I was actually forced to consume your content under threat of starvation. And but he'd be so proud watching now. So Ken, I love you, man. I miss you, and I'm interviewing Andrew Klavan. It took 9 years, but here we are. So you have a lot of fans, and apparently when the next level, you got some fans up there too. So that's
the important level. Yeah,
that's right. So there's so many places to start here, but I guess we should start with the obvious one. Recently on this program was a sort of lowercase Elohim, a god of men, not so much a truly divine creature. But I had accused Jeremy Boring of self-proclaimed deification, which he said is actually not the case at all, that a one Andrew Klavan had ordained him a divine creature. Can you address these salacious rumors that you were going around ordaining other men as gods among us?
Look, lowercase gods, but guilty. I think one of my few genuine talents is I have a really powerful ability to discern talent in other people, and I could see pretty quickly when Jeremy started the Daily Wire that this thing was going to work, and it was going to work because he was thinking it through in a way that is quite peculiar to him. He's very insightful about how businesses work and how media works and all this, and I could see all of that. And so I deemed him the God King, and he has rightly said, that it's both praise and a way of telling the people around us, because we were hiring all these young kids who don't actually believe there's such a thing as a boss. I did it on the one hand to give him his proper due in the business. And I heard him say on your show that it was also a rebuke. That's not true. It's not a rebuke at all. It is a friendly word to the wise from an elder. Remember thou art mortal and must die. That it was meant to be a joke and to keep him laughing. And I think it has, actually.
That's true. He did say that you often, sort of like a laxative, insert truth into compliments, and that it is just never known, what is actually Andrew Klavan saying. And I actually think you're onto something there. Have you considered a Klavan line of greeting cards, that you are mortal and all will perish? I really feel like that could be a great birthday card, that you could offer to people.
I am that cheery guy, who reminds people that yes, it is nice when you succeed at something, but it all disappears. And
now I do have to ask, since you've said that you have this sort of spider sense ability to detect talent, I'm really curious. Are you detecting anything at all right now?
Not a thing. That's
okay,
just an absolute flat line. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Well, I think 5G is an issue. He must not be coming through clear enough. Well, all right. So you do take ownership of that. So it is important to listeners, because I would tease Jeremy about this for a long time, but the lowercase God King was not self-proclaimed, because I self-proclaimed apostles are my least favorite apostles. And
yeah, they usually don't work. Yeah. I mean, Jeremy's just not clever enough to come up with that. I'm sorry.
Good. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Now, so let's dive into the AK origin story, because every superhero, or in this case, tragic hero, has to have an interesting early years. And just skipping around a little bit. So I love you came to faith much later in life, which I think is so interesting. And you grew up, it sounds like, from listening to one of your videos where you had a pretty tumultuous relationship with your father. At least it sounded like that. You had said that he would actually come in and try and antagonize and disrupt anything that you were doing to succeed. And I'm going, that must have been brutal.
It was quite terrible. It was extra terrible because he was not a bad person. He was not a brute. He was not somebody who was always trying to destroy everything openly or attack you. But he was, he had problems, and he extended those problems. And there was something about me. I have 3 brothers, so we were a 4-brother family. My childhood was one long fist fight. It was like the last reel of a John Wayne movie, like people flying through doors and just absolute chaos all the time. And there was something about me specifically that just didn't sit right with my father. Something about my aspirations, something about my stubbornness, probably. And we just were in a clash of wills. And the thing that was so difficult about it was that he was not an evil person. I mean, I could see both that he was a good guy and a man of goodwill, and that he was not my friend, that there was something about me that he wanted gone. And it was the essential part of me, and the thing that I knew was what I was here for. And so even at a child's level. And I remember saying to myself at a very young age, this man is not your friend. His advice is not good. His actions are meant to hurt you. He doesn't mean to hurt you, but his actions are meant to hurt you. And that was very, very disturbing. I mean, it was the source of a lot of my youthful mental problems. That I loved him. He was my dad, and I had adopted, as we all do, some of his values. But there were poison pills in the value. And I've known a lot of people who were abused, or whose parents were alcoholics, or had some kind of catastrophic upbringing. And I didn't have that, and that in some ways made it more dangerous, because it seemed like I was growing up. It really did seem like I was growing up in this Leave It to Beaver kind of perfect suburban world. But it was all kind of false and misleading, and it took a lot of work. I think I lost 10 years of my life just getting past that.
Wow. Was there ever any later in life, any reconciliation or any sort of restoration in that relationship?
Well, in the comic tragic way of things, we made a separate peace. We became peaceable with one another for the most part. We just didn't talk about anything of import. We just didn't have any real conversations. We talked about computers. We talked about movies.
So you became men.
Yeah, exactly.
You ushered into the the rightful passage of being a man, right? And then as you get older, it becomes weather,
Yeah,
gas prices and
exactly.
things like that.
It was a very careful relationship in that way. What the comical part of it, or the comic tragical part of it, is that when I realized that I had become a Christian, almost without knowing it, um, I realized too that that was going to end the comedy between us. That was going to end the kindness, because he told me many in my childhood that he would disown me if I ever converted from Judaism, which I didn't believe in the first place. And it was very important to him that that not happen. And when I saw that it was happening, almost really against my will, I knew I was going to have to break it to him, and that it was going to explode this carefully constructed pleasantness between us. And just as I was on the verge of breaking it to him, he came down with his final illness. And so I had to have a conversation with myself in which I ultimately decided not to tell him, because I thought it would break his heart basically break his heart on his deathbed. And I thought, I can't do that. That doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. It's not going to suddenly convert him. It's not going to, reconcile us in any real way. And so I never told him, and he never knew.
Wow, man, that is tragically, I guess, in the Shakespearean sense. That must have been, it's so. I'm curious too, like, so you were a cultural Jew.
It was important to my father that we learn all the rites and rituals, and that we go to Hebrew school and be bar mitzvahed and all of that. But my mother was a stone atheist. My father, I always suspected my father had some belief in God, in that sort of bargaining way that people have. God, please don't let me, get sick or fail or whatever. But there was no God in our house. There was no praying. There was no discussion of what God wanted from you. It just didn't exist. As an actual God, just didn't exist in our house as a real entity. And so the whole thing was just empty to me. And when Jews get angry at me for converting, and I say to them, I was never really a Jew, because the whole structure was it was a beautiful cathedral, but it was an empty house. There was nobody home. And so, I've told this story many times, but when I was bar mitzvahed, it was against my will, very much against my will. And I felt that I was a liar for saying, now I'm part of this religion. And I was given all these, I grew up in a very nice neighborhood, and I was given all these expensive gifts, jewelry and silver and gold and savings bonds. After about 6 months, I just thought, I can't stand this. It's accusing me from my little leather box that I kept it in. And I snuck out one night, and I stuffed it in the trash and threw away what must have been thousands of dollars, because I just couldn't bear to be accused by it. And that was supposed to be my goodbye to religion. That was basically, I never wanted to feel that way again.
Oh man, that sounds very Edgar Allan, like Telltale Heart. Like, was it just you wake up in the middle of the night and the box would just be beating and be like, Andrews,
you lie,
Yeah, it calls to you, man. Well, it's funny too. A lot of people got mad at you for converting. They saw how you turned out now, and now they're like, you know what? That's fine. You just go that way, right? So you're probably gonna get disowned.
Good riddance.
It's gonna come full circle. I always love seeing how people end up doing what they do. Was there this proclivity for the gift of gab and writing at a young age? I know you mentioned that you joked that you were one of the few that could have actually failed out of Hebrew school, which should be impossible for someone with your background. But did you excel in communication and writing and all the things that that Jeremy would say you don't excel in now, but you do? Like, did you show any signs of becoming the Klavan that we know today?
I was a really good writer from a young age, and I was such a bad student. I didn't want to study at all. I hated all authority, and I really did not study until I got out of college. That's when I began my education. But I wrote my way through college, and I wrote my way through school, because I could write so well that people didn't really realize that I had no idea what I was talking about. And I remember, the pinnacle of my greatest academic achievement was writing a paper on a Blake poem. Blake was both a poet and an artist, an engraver. and I had no idea. They just told us the title and said we should comment on it. I had no idea what I was writing about, a poem or an engraving. So I had to constantly say, this work, if work is the word I want, I just got to this whole thing. And I think I got a B- on this paper. And so that was really the story of my education. And it was only afterward, at the very end of my education, when I realized I had made a terrible mistake, that I set about the very dogged pursuit of reading every single book that I had bought in college, which then became reading every book. I mean, Knowles is always joking, I've read all the books. And I was just this dogged pursuit, and I vowed to myself I would never again comment on a book I hadn't read. I would never comment on a movie I hadn't seen, and that was just my rule from that point on. So I had to see and read everything.
Wow. It was funny. We did a random lottery in my senior year lit class in high school, and I drew William Blake, who I'm assuming we're talking about the same individual.
That's the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I remember my teacher was like, I showed her, she was like, oh, have fun with that one. And then you see a picture of the guy, his like hair is very sort of like Jimmy Neutron, just afloat. And he's just like, I'm like, that guy, he was nuts. Brilliant. But and she's like, what do you think he means? And I was like, you're the teacher. You tell me why don't you just save me the trouble here? Because I have no idea what this guy is saying right now. But I'm curious, what was it like? What years were you at Berkeley, and what was it like? Were there people still, because I visited a few times and there did appear to be people living in trees there,
yes,
sort of Swiss Family Robinson style.
Well, I went there for the riots. I thought I didn't want to go to college. I hated school. And so I didn't want to go anywhere. And the only college I applied to was the University of California, Berkeley, because I thought there would be riots. I thought this would be really exciting. It was kind of where history was taking place. But by the time I got there, in the way of these things, the riots were over. And it was just it was just a place full of criminals, essentially, and homeless people and beggars and pot smokers. And all
it's cool to see how it's changed entirely now. So.
Yeah, exactly. What happened though is that I went to school for a year. I simply couldn't bear it, and I was on the verge of a breakdown. I was fantastically depressed, and so I dropped out, and I got a job as a radio reporter in Berkeley. And Patty Hearst was kidnapped. Now, people don't remember this, but at the time, that was the crime of the decade. This was the daughter of the newspaper, mogul. And she was kidnapped from around the corner from me. And I wound up at 19 years old covering the biggest story in the country and wrestling with, CBS reporters and NBC reporters to get a place at the table and all this stuff. So I really that was my experience of Berkeley, was the Patty Hearst kidnapping. Which was by this radical gang called the SLA, who wound up being killed by police in a gunfight in LA shortly thereafter. And so that was my experience. I didn't get the radical experience of riots and protests and all that. What I got was the first whiff of this crazy theory stuff that was just rising into academia and the Patty Hearst case.
Now, did you, while you were at Berkeley, because I know I went to USC, which has inculcated in me a deep hatred of Berkeley, Stanford, and any other rival for our pay-to-play model that we have. But was there a teacher, despite your disdain towards school and authority, did you have any professors or anyone that left an indelible mark on you that challenged your thinking and just got you fired up?
Well, what happened was absolutely true. I picked up a hitchhiker, a beautiful lady hitchhiker, fell insanely in love with her. I kidnapped her and gave her 2 children. I've been married to her for 42 years, and her father was the chairman of the English department, and a very powerful figure at the university, which is why suddenly my grades started to go up. And this guy, Thomas Flanagan, he became a famous novelist in his time. He was a brilliant guy. He just knew everything. He had read everything, and he remembered everything he'd read, and he was just an absolute genius. And at his house, I met the biggest academics in the country, and I traveled through Ireland with Seamus Heaney, who went on to win the Nobel Prize.
Wow!
I met all these great minds and these academic minds, and so that had a big effect on me. I suddenly realized one, I knew nothing. I hadn't read anything. I'd been pretending to know things, and these people actually did know something. And two, I could know something. I could engage in conversation with these people and not come off as a complete idiot. And so that really gave me a key into an intellectual world that I first of all had disdained. I'd been trained to disdain. My father had taught me to disdain it, and that was the first thing. And secondly, I was intimidated by it. I was a kid, I didn't think I could be smart like that. And I realized, no, I was actually as bright as any of these guys. I just hadn't done the work that they had done. And so that was transformative. It genuinely was.
Wow. So your story is akin to Rocky 3 when he believes he can just take on Mr. T for being Rocky, but then realizes he can't, and then trains and you win.
You've got to do that thing. And it came with the music too. I did the same music.
That's true. It's hard to read to Rocky though, because Gonna Fly Now doesn't really, it's tougher to kind of digest there.
It's hard to read running up and down those steps.
That is true. Now, so just for the record here, I want to be on the record, Senator, that you did in fact kidnap you met your wife through hitchhiking, and kidnapping is sort of depends on that was the prosecution's case, but yours was assist. There's a line between kidnapping and transporting and interstate commerce, right?
All I can tell you is that woman sat down. First of all, she was my wife is still a beautiful woman, but she was 19, I think, and she was model level gorgeous. And she sat down in my car. I drove around the corner I wasn't even in my car when I saw her hitchhiking. I ran to get my car. Came out, and I was in this Berkeley neighborhood that had a one-way grid, and I went around a residential area at about 50 miles an hour, almost killed an old woman, unbelievably got to her before some other guy, and rolled up and then casually said, going my way. You feel like a
this I know it's going to sound to our younger listeners here inordinately creepy, dangerous, and complete, but I mean,
it was all those things. Yeah.
This is something your parents say, and you kind of roll your eyes, but it was a different time. Like, was this a thing you just did? Like, you would. Because today you can't imagine this happening. I have some people who won't get in the car with an Uber, like a background checked, like car that's on a GPS that I can track where it's going. And it's like, so back then, was that just a thing you did? You could hitchhike?
There was more hitchhiking then, definitely, and certainly in Berkeley, with crazy people like my wife was at the time. They were doing these incredibly dangerous things. I always tell the story and say, "Let this be a lesson to you: never hitchhike," because she never got away.
There is no one that got away with. Oh my gosh.
The minute she sat down in the car, I thought, "Oh my Lord, I just fallen off the edge of the cliff."
So so you've been blessed with just exposure. This makes it all the more, disappointing that you've ended up how you have with such brilliant people around you. This is really fascinating. And you actually, and I think maybe some people who've just labeled you as a right-wing nut job might not recognize that you began your career as a Sith Lord, actually, and not a Jedi, right? You were I joke, of course. But you can't, some other, actually, I believe like Mr. Charles Krauthammer as well, that you were much more liberal, and then somehow during the Reagan rising tide, you had a transformation and came to conservatism.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, this is one of the reasons that I understand people on the left, is that the one thing every leftist knows is that the right is evil. So you can say, well, I feel the left is wrong about this, is wrong about that, is wrong about this and the other thing. But the minute you say, well, maybe you should be a Republican, you think, oh, I'm not evil, I'm not that bad. And so I was a very dissatisfied liberal. I hated all political correctness always. I remember I was on the campus radio station. I was the news director of the campus radio station, and they started to have segments of the Asian hour and the black hour and all these different racial hours. And I was like, this is insane. The Bakke case where they established affirmative action. I thought, no, this is really bad. But I just knew Republicans were evil. And then what happened, two things happened. One was the Berlin Wall came down. And I looked at that, and it's hard to convey to people who are younger how impossible that was. It was kind of like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, something you never, ever, ever thought was going to happen, except for Reagan. He was the only person who said it was going to happen. And I remember watching that, and I thought, that old buzzard was right about everything, And then the second thing was that in the 90s, I left the country. I got sick of political correctness, and I went to London to live in London with my family for a year and stayed 7 years. So I was taken out of American politics. and just didn't pay any attention to it. I paid attention to Clinton, sleeping with Monica Lewinsky, but that was basically it. Everything else was British politics, which I didn't care about, but was interested in. And when I returned, I suddenly realized that all the people I agreed with were these evil Republicans. So I had heard about Rush Limbaugh, for instance, and how horrible he was, what a terrible guy he was. And I thought, well, I should listen to him to hear the devil, because the devil has got a radio show. I want to hear what he's doing. And I listened to him and I thought, no, I agree with this. I actually think this guy is pretty funny and entertaining, and he's saying a lot of smart things. And I would lurk on National Review, had a little segment called the Corner online, where like Jonah Goldberg would talk with some other person else, and I used to call them my imaginary friends, because they're the only people who were saying things that made any sense to me whatsoever. And I started to meet them, and that was how I started to realize that something had happened to me, that I had shifted while I was away. And then of course 9/11 happened, and when I started to hear the left say things like, why do they hate us? I don't think because they're evil. They're supposed to hate us. They're evil, like crazy people. They should hate us. And I realized the culture had just really soured, and that was kind of the final, link in the chain.
It's interesting too. I know we had a massive economic boom in the '90s, and it seems to correlate with your departure from the country for seven years. So
almost instantaneous. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like the Jonah narrative. We remove Andrew from the ship, and suddenly, it's clear skies, right? On the way. No, it's interesting because I guess I'd like to ask you, because we are in such a. It's funny when people say we're in the most polarized times ever. I go, well, not ever, because I haven't seen Oklahoma march into California yet for invade, but like it is really exhausting. And I know for a lot of people that I know, it's just the temptation seems to be just put your hands in the air and say, you know what, I don't know what to do anymore. And it's also hard to know what is truth. And I see this on, because obviously if I have a political bias towards something, I'm immediately inclined to accept as gospel when I hear something confirmation bias. And then multiple times I have found things that like this is yesterday or today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And but it's hard to know. And even with things like COVID, it was tough because I had really smart people telling me both things, and it was tough. So how do you go about just, I think I have heard this complaint from a lot of people, which is like, I'm just so exhausted with politics, and I don't even know what's true. I don't have trust in the mainstream media. I also don't have trust in the sort of, moralizing on the right and sort of this kind of shame, culture. And I just don't know what to do anymore. It's a tough problem we have right now.
Yeah, when the Daily Wire was starting, and I was, much older than everybody I was working with, and they would say, "Oh, this is the most divided time in America," and I would be like, "Guys, we used to kill our presidents. You just yell at you. We would assassinate our leaders. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy. We just shot them. So it's like it was a very divided time back then too. But the difference, and it's an essential difference, is that the establishment is now radical, and that is the thing that is really remarkable, and it's the thing that is damaging. It's what's so damaging to the country. When I started at the Daily Wire, now it's maybe 6-7 years ago tops, I could essentially read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and feel that I had the facts and then take my position on those facts. That's no longer true. The New York Times is now worthless as a conveyor of information. The Wall Street Journal just doesn't have the same level of reporting power that the Times has. And so it's very, very difficult to just get to the point where you say, these are the facts. So that's where all these conspiracy theories come from. It's hard to know. Was the election stolen? I know people who are absolutely sure of it. I know people who are absolutely positive it didn't happen. It's really hard. And as you said, with COVID, I have no idea whether vaccinations were good or bad. I mean, the numbers seem to teach me that they kept people from dying, but they don't seem to have kept people from getting the disease and all. It's just really hard to get the basic facts. And the thing that I think about this, I believe that is the crisis we're in, a crisis of information, and it's the internet. And the internet is the biggest leap in information technology since the invention of the printing press. And that may be a cliched thing to say at this point, but it is simply absolutely true. And if you remember, and I actually personally remember, if you think back to the invention of the printing press, it was followed, by 300 years of religious warfare that ripped Europe to pieces. And it was, when the Catholic Church was saying, no, don't translate the Bible. We don't want anybody reading that. They weren't all wrong. They were all wrong, but the idea that this was going to be a cataclysm was exactly right. And I think that that's what's happening now, is the democratization of information and what Samuel Coleridge used to call the clerisy, the chattering classes, the people who set opinions and set standards and set culture. Those people feel their power threatened, and they're acting exactly like the Catholic Church in censoring, tormenting, and effectively burning at the stake anybody who says that their information is false. And so that's what we're in. We're in an information war that is dangerously close to becoming a real war at times. And so this weariness that people feel, I think, has to be overcome. The country needs you to do the work, to get the facts, and at least start to find out who is trying to tell the truth. This is the thing that bothers me. It bothers me on the right even more than on the left. There are lots of people on the right who think everybody's lying, and you made a mistake. The other day I had the wonderful thriller writer Stephen Hunter on my show, and he writes these wonderful conservative sniper suspense novels. And he had an opinion, and somebody wrote to me and said, "I disagree with that opinion. I'll never read his books." I thought, well, wait, that's really tough. People accuse Jeremy of wielding the Daily Wire, some anti-Trump conspiracy. And I was there, and that didn't happen. But there was differing opinions about whether to support Trump when he came up. And so what I'm trying to get to is, people will say, like, everybody lies. But not everybody lies. That's just not true. Ben Shapiro, may be wrong, but he doesn't lie. I've watched him for years. I may be wrong, but I'm doing my damnedest to get at the truth. And so that's where you have to plant your flag. You have to plant your flag with the people of goodwill who are not trying to sell you anything. You know where I stand. You know what my opinions are. But I'm not going to fool you. And if I get something wrong, I'm the first person to come out and just say, oh, yeah, I missed that. The guys who are dangerous are the New York Times, pretending to still be the New York Times. The New York Times is like that guy in Man in Black who gets taken over by the alien, and the alien walks around in a human suit.
The Edgar suit.
Yeah. And that's the New York Times. That's Yale University as well. They're not Yale anymore. They're not the New York Times anymore. They're leftism dressed up in the clothing of the New York Times. And those are the people who are dangerous. It's not the people who say this. It's not the Sean Hannitys of the world, or the Tucker Carlsons who say this is my opinion, or Rachel Maddow. I always tell my friends, I love that MRC site, Newsbusters, but I always tell them, don't pick on Rachel Maddow. She's an honest broker of left-wing opinion. That's fair. I disagree with everything she says, but she has an integrity. It's the people pretending that they're giving you the news who are the danger. And so we shouldn't lose faith. We shouldn't lose faith in one another. We shouldn't lose faith in the people who are at least trying to get it right. The real problem comes in from this bubble that the clerisy is in, where you'll hear them, for instance, use in a news story, they'll use a phrase like gender affirming care. And I've written letters to reporters and to editors saying, the issue at hand is whether or not this is gender affirming care or an atrocity. When you butcher a child to change his sex, is that gender affirming care, or is that an atrocity? And as long as that is up for debate, you don't use a term like gender affirming care as a descriptor, because it's bad English. It's not a descriptor any more than you would say in a news story the atrocity of gender changing children. You just describe it and you say it. And so that's because our clerisy is so corrupt and so one-sided. And we're in a revolution. We're in an information revolution. What you're doing right this minute is part of that revolution. What the Daily Wire is doing is part of that revolution. And I'm very confident that we will move on to new evils and new horrors, but that this moment of crisis will pass, and that information will work its way out where we have, different sources of information and more sources of information. That will be a good thing. It's already happening.
So Just for the record, you are not currently subscribed to the New York Times.
I have my work subscription to the New York Times, and I read it almost every day, and it's laughable. I mean, it used to, it was always a left-wing paper, but seriously, in the 1980s, it was a great paper. I mean, go back and look at it. The reporting power they had was unbelievable. And though they have committed many wrongs and done many and told many lies, back then, it was a great left-wing paper. Now it's sophomoric. I mean, it's like something you get in college, like these, the workers of the world unite, they have this op-ed page. I call it Knucklehead Row, their op-ed page, where, a dissenting opinion would die of loneliness. They have Ross Douthat, bringing the Catholicism, and he's excellent. I like Ross Douthat very much. But the rest of it is one panicky, hysterical old lady after another, which is an offense to old ladies. I've known some tough old ladies, but they just sound like, they sound like these screeching women in a burning building, all of them. And it's just ridiculous. It's a bad newspaper.
Well, folks, we're going to go to a remote from our sponsor. So Democracy Dies in Darkness. So be sure and get up your copy. just kidding.
Democracy Dies in Darkness if we have anything to say about it.
Well, we only have a few minutes left because I opened up the can of worms that was the culture war. But I do want to make sure we cover a few things here before the mothership returns to reclaim Andrew. First off, you recently wrote a book, a highly anticipated sequel to your thriller Goodnight Moon. Just kidding. But tell us about that book. It appears to be behind your right ear.
It's up there, yes.
Yeah.
The Truth and Beauty. It is a.
Can we get a zoom in on it? Can we pull it off the shelf?
Let's see. Can we do that? Yeah.
Oh, I was hoping the bookcase revolved around it.
Yeah. With the lengthy subtitle, How the Lives and Works of England's Greatest Poets Point the Way to a Deeper Understanding of the Words of Jesus. So help me, Ryan. I wrote this book. I thought, well, I'm never going to be able to publish this book. I'll have to publish it myself because it's such an odd idea. I'll never find it. There's only one editor in the country who would ever even think of buying it. And I know a lot of the editors. But I have to write it. It is sent to me by God, and I know I have to write this book. And so I wrote this book, which is basically about the fact that in the 18th century in England and the early 19th century in England, the Romantic movement was trying to rebuild the culture that had fallen apart in the revolutionary era that brought the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And they were trying to rebuild the European culture. And that in doing so, they actually gave us a modern way to read the words of Jesus that don't change the words of Jesus, but just help us to see more clearly what in modern language, what it was exactly he was saying, because it's not that easy to tell, which is the premise of the book. It's hard to tell what Jesus is saying a lot of times. When he says, love your enemies, and you say, well, first of all, why? And second of all, I don't even like my enemies. Why would I do that? It's like, it sounds good. It sounds like, something moral. But when you start to think it through, you don't always really want to live like that. I mean, you sometimes think, well, I think it's the wrong thing to love my enemies. And so I found this poetry to be a way, accidentally, to be a way of understanding the truth of Christianity through the beauty of poetry, hence the title, which comes from John Keats, The Truth and Beauty. Well, I finished the book. I sent it to the one editor I thought might buy it. He bought it instantly with the full support of Zondervan, a Christian publishing house. He said to me, he's a very polite man, and he didn't quite come out and say, look, we're not going to sell any copies of this, but I believe in you. That's what he came right to the edge of saying that. The book was a USA Today bestseller. It's still selling very well. People have reacted to it. Not just, I wrote it purposely for people who don't read poetry. I didn't write it so you had to know all the poems and all this stuff. But people have reacted to it with real emotion. If you go on and look at the reviews on Amazon, it has really touched people, and it has done exactly what I hoped it would do, which is given them a fresh look at this ancient faith and the truth of it, which is so deep and so life transforming that if you turn it into a bunch of slogans, a bunch of, love your enemy pieties, you miss the fact that this incarnate word of God was actually giving you a revolutionary way to see the world every single day. And that's what it's trying to get at. It's trying to get at, like, how can I wake up every morning and get just a little taste of that revolution in my life? Because it's such a, I mean, as I'm sure you know, it's such a joyful revolution to go through. And it's such a wonderful addition to life, an abundance of life. And so anyway, this is my way as a writer, as a lover of poetry, as a lover of culture, of trying to reinvigorate the words of Christ for a new day. And again, it doesn't change anything that he said. He remains the same, but we change, and our language changes, and our outlook changes, and that's, so it speaks to that.
Let me ask you this. One thing about faith that I find so, particularly with the Christian faith, is so, I don't know if I call it difficult's the word, but do you ever have days where you just go, okay, I read I base my life on a book assembled over thousands of years and finally culminating in relatively recent history, the teachings of a wise rabbi out in the desert who allegedly walked on water, turned water into wine, raised people from the dead, and these deeds were written down and then at best published 30 years later, 40 years later, and then a series of just sort of oddly profound yet also strikingly informal notes, sort of like greeting cards written by a guy who was a Roman, a Roman Jewish, persecutor or prosecutor that suddenly converted. And just some days you read it and you go, this is, some of this is so profound, but some of this is just like, wow, I get it. This is crazy. Like this is really weird. And also there's 4 accounts and they don't line up 100% on everything. And so do you ever have days where you just go, huh? What I'm really drilling is like, what makes it real for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I went through this conversion experience, which, as I said, was a deeply reluctant experience, one of the things that I said to myself was my exit door, my kind of insurance policy was that if I become less realistic, I'm going to stop. If what I'm saying does not describe the world that I see in front of me, I'm going to stop. And I just a great example, when Game of Thrones came out and it was full of sex and violence, some Christian critics said wrote the stories as if Jesus never existed. And I thought, why? Because Jesus existed and then people stopped having sex and killing each other? What are you talking about? That kind of pious idea that we're living in a world of happy endings, that we're living in a world where, God will make it all turn out okay in this life. And we obviously do not. I mean, in fact, when you read the Gospels, Jesus keeps saying, these people who say Christianity should make the world a better place. And Jesus kept saying, no, forget that. The world's never going to be a better place. You are going to have life in abundance. That's different than saying the world is going to improve. And so I said that to myself as I converted. And in fact, I found that my conversion made me deeply more realistic. My belief in in that level that many of us call the supernatural, which is that level of meaning. When you kill a child, you've done something that's evil, right? It's not evil if we're just flesh and blood and nothing. It's not, it's just one animal killing another animal. What's evil about it? What's evil is that level of meaning, that supernatural level of meaning. And having come to faith in that, having come to believe in that, I've become much more realistic about human beings, much more compassionate toward the brokenness of all of us. And that is the thing that keeps me coming back, because I do have days, especially I write about this in the book. I write about the fact that I don't actually, because I was 49 when I converted, I had thought about everything. I had gone down every wrong road you can go down. So I'm pretty sure I got it right. I don't have philosophical doubts ever, really. But I do occasionally look at the miracles and think, really, did that really happen? I write about the miracles and my faith in them, and my belief in them, and why that belief is sustained. But sure, it's so easy. The flesh is so here. Matter is so real. And the supernatural meaning of things seems so contingent that it's easy to lose your grasp on the only thing that's real, which is the supernatural meaning of things, and fall into the one thing that comes and goes, which is the flesh and matter. It's very easy to do. The world is obviously constructed so that you have to climb that mountain. And I think that because climbing that mountain gives you wisdom, because it gives you compassion, because above all, it gives you joy, which I don't mean happiness. That's silly. I mean, what I mean by joy is vigor, the idea that life really matters and is really worth doing and is really a miraculous thing because it gives you all those things. I think that's the confirmation that you get. And the fact that when you live in the flesh, when you live in the world of matter without believing in Christ, you wind up, twerking in front of the Supreme Court for the right to kill your baby and looking very much like, some kind of cartoon demon from a bad Christian comic book. So I think that's the proof. That's the proof you get, what happens to your life, that abundance of life that you get. And that's my answer, to the doubts.
I read a quote this morning from a pastor who's talking about Pascal, and he said that, independent of the gamble, was the idea that to the first step would actually not even be assessing Christianity and its merits, but asking, is it something you want to be true? Do you want to? Is this truth worthy of being true? Like, is this something that we would want it to be true? And only then, if that's true, would the truth actually make itself known to us? And I'd never thought about it that way. And I thought, yeah, it's like we should all want it to be true. We should all. I am so excited that the possibility that this is not all there is, because otherwise, I mean, it's just, this is rough. World is rough, and life's great right now. Do you ever think just how like miserable life must have been for just eons of humans? I sometimes find myself going like the dark age. I just go back, like I was like, it was before all this. Like it must have been awful.
Yeah, no, and still is in many, many places. One of the stepping stones in my conversion, I went through a period, I was mostly, I was a functional atheist all the time, but I would have called myself an agnostic. But I became an atheist for a period of time, and during that time read a lot of atheist books, all the postmodernists and all the materialists and all this stuff, and none of them made any sense to me. I thought these guys are not speaking honestly. And then I read the Marquis de Sade, the guy we get the word sadism from, who basically said there is no God, so we should torture women because that's a lot of fun, and kill people because that's kind of fun, and just exert our power because and I thought, this is the only atheist I've ever read whose logic is absolutely consistent. He is people in the movies, they always show him as this kind of naughty little fellow, as if he was chasing his girlfriends around with a wet towel, flicking them in the backside. No, he was a psychopathic killer, who believed that psychopathic killing was the right thing to do because there was no God. And I thought, this makes sense. And this is clearly hell. I mean, this is clearly hell on earth. And I just thought, if I can at least not believe in this, that's what I will do. And that was like the wall I hit, where that's the only leap of faith I ever took. The only leap of faith I ever took was that, no, it really is better not to rape someone to death than to rape someone to death. That's the basis. That's the illogical kind of basis of my faith. That's it. That's the only one. That it's better to give a hungry child, a piece of bread than to shoot a man lying in the street. That is my leap of faith, that there is something good and bad. There are actions that are bad and actions that are good, and that's what Sade realized was not true if there was no God, and he lived his life that way.
Well, that's a campaign slogan if I ever heard one, which is give bread to children, don't shoot people in the street. My name's Andrew Klavan, and I approve
Vote
this.
for me.
I approve this message. Well, we got to get you out of here. So quick lightning TikTok round here. If you could answer these two questions and not plead the fifth. First off, what are some of Andrew's, as a prolific reader, what are some books that you say everyone should read these before they pass on to the next iteration of life?
Everyone should at least see some Shakespeare plays and read the great tragedies that Shakespeare wrote. I would recommend that everybody read, the one difficult book I would recommend that everybody read is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, because I think it is the reputation of all the nonsense that's coming out here, and it's just an irrefutable reputation of it. There's so many great books to read. You should read the Bible. You should at least read the Gospels. Not because I don't say that as a preacher, as a preachment. I say it because it shaped everything you think and everything you see, and so you might as well know where that comes from. And if you don't, you're actually living in ignorance about who you are as a Westerner. There's so much wonderful stuff to read. if you haven't read Dickens, if you haven't read, um, a book that I think everybody should read, because I actually think there came a point when literature, as all arts do as they get old, split in two. And one became a kind of intellectual literature like Ulysses and the modernists and all this. And then a couple of lonely sailors kept sailing in the old tradition, and one of them was Somerset Maugham. And he wrote a book called The Razor's Edge. And if you have not read The Razor's Edge, I believe it is just as great as Ulysses, but in a different tradition, an older tradition. There's so many books that I can't even begin.
I know. We'll have to. We'll get a list from you.
Read Shakespeare and the guy. If you haven't read Shakespeare and the Gospels, you don't know who you are. That's what I would say.
That's great. And last thing, Andrew, you've written so much. What is your writing process? How do you are you disciplined? Are you just prolific? Are you getting, revelations from sort of, spiritual beings on high? How are you able to crank out? I think I saw something like 30 or 40 different books on there. How do you do it?
I am extraordinarily disciplined because I'm a very slow writer. I'm not,
really? Okay.
If I could write at the speed of Ben Shapiro, I would have 100 million books, because I am nothing if not disciplined. When I was a kid, the people who turned me on to literature when I was a kid were the American tough guy writers. Among them, Raymond Chandler, who wrote the Philip Marlowe detective stories, and I just loved. Philip Marlowe was who I wanted to be. He was my male role model in life, and I just read everything by Chandler. And there was a book called, I think, Raymond Chandler Speaking or something like that, which was his letters and kind of a casual remarks. And in one of those letters, and remember, I'm a teenager at this point. In one of those letters, he said, you should have 4 hours a day during which you do nothing else but write. You can stand on your head, you can sit and stare, but you can't do anything else but write. You can't do anything else productive but write. And I took that advice on, and I wrote my first novel when I was 14 years old, and I went through all of college. Sometimes I was working 4 hours from 3 a.m. till 7 a.m, but I just stuck to that, and it became second nature to me. Now I can cheat a little bit if I get very busy or something like that, but I'm still basically on that schedule, 4 hours a day. I sit down, and if you do that, one page is 300 to 350 words. If you write for 4 hours, you're going to write at least one page. Even a slow writer like me is going to probably write 3 or 4 pages. That's a book. At the end of a year, that's a book. So if you live long enough, you'll get your 30 books.
All right. Well, you heard it, 4 hours. That's is interesting. I see why everyone was so prolific back then, before the advent of Instagram and social media. So that's we've been robbed of those 4 hours. So, well, that's awesome. Andrew, thank you so much. I know we are well past your stated deadline, but I so appreciate your insights and just sharing your story with us. This is far better than Jeremy led me to believe it would be. So thank you.
I know you have to say it's far better than Jeremy. That's what I want to hear.
That's true. I don't like to pick sides or anything, but for more of Andrew's thoughts on the New York Times, you can visit him at Andrew Klavan, New York Times Love Fest collab.com/discount. Andrew, anything else? People can pick up the book now, obviously, and your show is out as once a week, right?
It's on Fridays in the Daily Wire, but you can get it anytime you want on Apple Podcasts. And I would love it if you'd come by. I think I'm really pleased with the show now that it's once a week. I got a little tired of 4 days a week, but once a week, it's really good quality material. So I hope people will come by and listen.
Well, I've been saying that for years. I was saying that at 1 out of 4, Andrea Clavens is fantastic. So I'm glad that management finally caught on to what we're going there. So, well, Andrew, thank you so much for the time today. And folks, thanks for camping with us. We'll see if we don't get canceled. All right. Thanks for joining us, folks. If you want to help us out, and we're confident you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button here on our YouTube channel. And if you ever feel like just listening to these, you can check us out on all major podcast streaming